Welcome to another episode of AI Talks with Chris and Nita. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into discretization in machine learning. You sent over some pretty interesting research on this topic.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's, one of those things that can seem a little bit, technical and maybe even a little dry at first glance. But it's actually, so fundamental to how some of these really powerful machine learning algorithms work. It's really exciting to sort of dig into.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's like under the hood that maybe a lot of people don't think about, but is really important to how these things work.
It's kind of like it's really bridging the gap between the way that we humans, tend to understand information.
Right.
And the way that a lot of these algorithms are kind of natively working with the data,
Yeah.
Like we as humans, we think in categories, right? Think about, income brackets and stuff. But, a lot of the algorithms, they're seeing the world as like this continuous kind of spectrum, like this number line that just keeps going. And discretization is really kind of like, it's like translating between those two worlds.
So it's kind of like giving the algorithms a cheat sheet to understanding our human way of looking at the world.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. If you think about an algorithm like a decision tree, for example, like the way decision trees work is by kind of recursively splitting the data into smaller and smaller groups based on some criteria.
Right.
And so if you have a variable, let's say like age, which is continuous, the tree might decide, okay, I'm going to split, everybody who's younger than 23.6 years old this way and everyone older than that this way. And so it can become very, very kind of complex and potentially overfit. So essentially, you're sort of making, it's almost like you're making it easier to understand.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
It's kind of like, if you have like a super messy closet,
Right.
it's really hard to find anything.
Right.
But if you, go through the effort of organizing everything and putting it in these nice labeled boxes,
Right.
it's so much easier to find what you're looking for.
But wouldn't you be losing some information by grouping those things together, though?
Yeah, that's a great point. There is this trade-off. Whenever you discretize, you are going to sacrifice some level of granularity.
Oh, yeah, right. You're not going to have the same super specific resolution as you would if you kept everything continuous.
Yeah.
But in exchange, you often gain a lot of robustness and the ability to uncover hidden patterns, potentially, that you wouldn't otherwise see. Like, for instance, imagine if you're trying to analyze customer churn.
Okay.
And you're looking at age as a variable.
Right.
If you look at it as a continuous variable, it might be really hard to see any sort of clear pattern, right?
Right.
But if you discretize it into age ranges, you might discover that people in the 25 to 34-year-old range, they're way more likely to churn than everybody else. And that's a pattern that could have been totally masked when you were looking at it just as this continuous variable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, our research mentions a few different techniques for actually going about doing the discretization. Equal width, we've got equal frequency,
Right.
We've got k-means, and custom binning. What are those and what are the differences?
So each technique has its own, kind of quirks.
Right.
And its own use cases.
Okay.
Equal width is definitely the simplest one. You're basically just dividing the data into bins of equal size across the entire range. So it's almost like if you imagine slicing a pie into equal portions, that's basically what equal width is doing. Equal frequency, on the other hand, that's aiming for an equal number of data points in each bin. And that's where it starts to get interesting, because you can imagine if you're discretizing something like income level using equal frequency, one group might represent people earning $30,000 to $50,000, while another group might represent people earning like $500,000 to $1 million. And it would be the same number of people in each bin, even though the actual dollar amounts are drastically different.
Yeah, so the size of the bins can be very, very different, even though they contain the same number of data points. That's wild.
It is, yeah. It's kind of like, how we have congressional districts in the United States. Each district is supposed to have roughly the same number of people, but they can vary wildly in terms of their geographic size and even their economic, condition.
Interesting. Now, what about k-means?
Yeah, so k-means, this one's a little bit more complex.
Okay.
Because it's actually using a clustering algorithm to group the data points based on their similarity. So basically, you're starting with the number of clusters you want, which is the K.
Right.
And then the algorithm kind of iteratively groups the data points that are closest to each other in terms of whatever variable you're discretizing. So you can end up with bins of varying widths, but, hopefully with more internal similarity within each bin. It's
Yeah.
almost like if you're, trying to group customers not just by age, but also by their spending habits. K-means could help you identify, clusters of high spending young adults versus, more budget conscious retirees.
Interesting. So it's kind of looking at the overall characteristics of the data points.
Exactly.
And
Sure.
trying to make the bins make sense in terms of their similarity.
Right.
Okay, that's fascinating. And then finally, we have custom binning. I imagine this is where our domain expertise comes in, right?
Yeah, this is where we really get to put on our thinking caps
Okay.
and use our knowledge of the data to kind of create bins that make sense for the specific problem we're trying to solve. So for instance, if we're analyzing medical data, we might create custom bins based on, clinically relevant age ranges or, blood pressure thresholds or something like that.
So it's really about understanding the data and the particular application.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So it's not just a matter of blindly applying a technique. It's really thinking about the data, our goals, and which method's going to help us uncover those meaningful insights. Now, what happens after we've discretized the data?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Like, how do we know if we've made the right choices?
So validation is key. We need to make sure that the decisions we've made during discretization are actually helping us, achieve our goals.
Yeah.
Whether that's, improving the performance of our model or making the results easier to interpret. And, there's a bunch of different ways to validate this. We might compare the accuracy of models trained on, both the continuous data and the discretized data. We might look at how well the model generalizes to new data. But the key is we need to have some way of measuring whether our discretized data is actually doing what we want it to do.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We've gone from why discretization is important to the various techniques for actually going about it.
Right.
And the importance of validation afterwards. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I would just say, remember, discretization is a really powerful tool. But any tool, it needs to be used thoughtfully.
Right.
So consider your data, your algorithms, your goals carefully.
Okay.
And, always be mindful of those potential pitfalls like information loss or even introducing bias through the way that you choose to bin things. But yeah, it's a really fascinating topic.
It is. It's something I think, the more you kind of peel back the layers on it, the more interesting it gets.
Totally.
So I appreciate you walking us through all this today.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for our listeners, keep sending us your questions. Keep sending us your thoughts.
Yeah.
And we'll catch you in the next episode of AI Talks.
See you then.
See ya.